The sole survivor in a 2012 triple homicide in Modesto, California, a case that took nearly 12 years to go to trial and ended in an unprecedented jury recommendation of the death penalty, is finally speaking out. Just a few days ago, I received a message from this sole survivor, Janie Siebels, and she asked me to tell her story. So yesterday on December the 6th, I had the privilege of speaking with Janie, the sole survivor in this triple homicide, and get all of the details to share with you guys. Now, this story really begins the year prior in 2011. In 2011, Janie was 18 years old. She had graduated from high school, and around that same time, she actually reconnected with a man, 30-year-old Richard Tyrone Garcia, who she had met a couple of years prior when she was 16 years old. Now, after Janie initially met him at the age of 16, they lost contact, and then when she was 18, they reconnected through mutual acquaintances. And before long, Janie finds herself in a romantic relationship with Richard. Richard was everything she thought she wanted in a man. He had a job, he was very charismatic, he was very doting. They would do fun things together, they would go to the movies, he would take her to dinner, he would take her to concerts, and everything seemed good. From the age of about 10 years old, Janie was actually raised by her older sister, and when she reacquainted with Richard, Janie was living in a home with her older sister's fiance, her 8-year-old nephew, her 16-year-old little brother David, in addition to her soon-to-be brother-in-law's brother Edward and his fiancee Alexandria. So as you can imagine, this was a very full house. And when Janie started dating Richard and their relationship was going really well, Janie ends up moving in with Richard. And before long, Janie discovers that she is expecting. Now, as you can imagine, this is not at all how Janie planned for things to go, but she was very optimistic about it. She felt very confident and secure and safe in the relationship that she had with Richard. As I said, he was very doting on her. He took her to do fun things, and he just seemed like the model boyfriend. On January the 27th or the 28th of 2012, it was actually Richard's 31st birthday, and Richard had spent the day out hanging out with his friends, celebrating his birthday, while Janie stayed behind at home and hung out with one of her friends. Later that evening, they had planned to have a party at their house, and so Janie ends up driving her friend home. Now, at this time, Janie does not have a cell phone herself. Her friend had a cell phone, and when Janie returned from taking her friend home, she actually ended up having her friend's cell phone with her. And so when she walks into the house with that cell phone in her hand, Richard is immediately drawn to the fact that she has a cell phone in her hand, and he immediately thinks that she is being unfaithful to him. Well, Janie doesn't have anything to hide. She immediately offers the phone to Richard to go through the phone because, as I said, that phone belonged to her friend, not her. However, at one point, the phone had been Janie's phone. So Janie hands the phone over to Richard, and Richard begins to search through that cell phone, and he uncovers a very old message that Janie had sent to another man before she knew Richard, and that was all it took for him to completely lose it. So immediately when he finds this message, he slaps Janie across the face, and that began a night of hours and hours of torture for Janie, one that she did not think she was going to survive. Richard ends up taking Janie to a bedroom where for hours, the entire night, he binds her, he gags her, he repeatedly burns her with a lighter, he kicks her in the face, he strangles her to the point that her body shakes. He holds a knife to her head and tells her that he is going to scalp her. He tells her that he does not want this baby and that he'll cut the baby out of her. And at some point, one of Richard's friends comes in and goes along with this. They tell Janie that they are going to take her to an orchard where they are going to force her to dig her own grave. And then they discuss other ways that they are going to dispose of her body after they end her life. Throughout that night full of torture, Richard played videos of Janie's loved ones and asked her how did she feel knowing that she would never hear their voices again. And this just continued for hours and hours. And Janie just did not think she was going to survive. And so they end up falling asleep. And Janie is awakened the next morning by the sunlight coming through the window. And she says she vividly remembers thinking, I think I'm going to survive this. I don't think that he is going to carry my body out during the daylight when he does not have the cover of darkness to conceal me. And when Richard wakes up and he sees Janie's face, all of the swelling and damage that he has done the previous night from kicking her in the face, he immediately starts apologizing to her and trying to smooth things over and make things right. But he wouldn't let her leave the house for a little while. He made her stay in the bedroom, and when she came out of the bedroom, he would make her keep her face down so no one else in the house would see all of the wounds and the damage that he had done to her. About 1 to 2 weeks after this attack, Richard leaves to go to work, and Janie sees this as her opportunity to get help. So she uses one of Richard's friend's cell phones, and she phones her sister to come pick her up. Her sister gets there to pick her up, and when she finds out everything that Janie has endured, she immediately takes her to the hospital for a medical examination, and she takes Janie to the police station to file a police report. And Janie says that she remembers being very scared and very concerned about filing that police report because she just kept thinking that Richard was going to come after her in retaliation. So after this takes place, Janie starts staying once again at her sister's home with all of those other individuals who live in the house. So on February the 7th, 2012, Richard, along with one of his friends, they actually get arrested for this torture case against Janie. And Richard is released on a $50,000 bail. It's at that time that he contacts Janie and starts feeding her his line of bull and telling her how much he loves her and how much he wants the baby and they're going to be a family. And at 18 years old, Janie falls right back into his trap. But she does not move back in with him fully. She's splitting her time kind of between her sister's home and Richard's home. And then that brings us to March the 2nd, 2012. Janie's sister, her fiance, they are out of town. Janie's nephew is staying with family. So inside that home was Janie, her 16-year-old little brother, David, as well as her future brother-in-law's brother, Edward, and his fiancée, Alexandria. Now, during this same time, Richard was actually traveling out of state, and he had been sending Janie photos of just kind of his trip along the way. And that evening, on the evening of March the 2nd, he starts asking Janie to send him photos. And nothing spicy, just photos of her. So she does that, and then he says, go outside on the front porch. The light is working. The light works on the front porch. You can send me a picture of yourself from the front porch. She didn't realize that he was trying to confirm where she was that evening. So later that night, Janie and the 3 other individuals in the home, they go to bed. They are in their home. They feel like they are safe. And she's not really worried about anything. At some point in the early morning hours of March the 3rd, 2012, 2 men, Armando Osegueda, who had previously been arrested, as well as Joseph Luis Henrique, enter that home that Janie and the 3 others are asleep in. They enter through a back door that has been left unlocked. And Richard knew that Janie and her family typically left the back door unlocked. Janie reports that she is awakened by something. She does not really remember if it was some sort of sound that woke her up or if she could just sense someone there in the room with her. And Janie opens her eyes and she sees a dark figure with the light of a cell phone glowing. And her first thought is that it is her younger brother, David, who had fallen asleep downstairs on the couch that evening. And within just seconds, that individual who is standing there over her bed turns around and he leaves the room. And he goes into the room across the hallway, which is occupied by Edward Reinig and Alexandria Tellez. And this is when Janie knows that life as she knows it is never going to be the same. She hears one shot and hears Edward scream. And shortly after, that is followed by multiple other shots. She hears Edward and Alexandria taking their last breaths. She goes to get up out of the bed, and she says as she got up out of the bed, the mattress made a noise, and she could hear one of the men say, "What was that?" or "What was that noise?" So she makes it to the other side of her bed, the side farthest from the bedroom door, and she curls up on the floor beside the bed. Before long, she hears the two men kick in her sister's bedroom door, which fortunately they were not in town, so there was no one in that bedroom. She then makes her way to the bathroom, and she hides in the bathtub while she phones 911. Now, Janie says that the operator that she spoke with was not very friendly and not very helpful. She was questioning Janie, asking her if she had been drinking, and Janie just was not getting her message across that there's someone in here murdering my family and I need assistance. But fortunately, finally the operator understood and dispatched officers to the home. So when officers arrive, they find 16-year-old David deceased with one or two GSWs to the back of his head and neck area, still on the couch. They said David never woke up. He never knew anything. And the bodies of Edward and Alexandria in that upstairs bedroom. At this point, they take 18-year-old Janie in for questioning, and she is interrogated for around 20 hours. And she says she immediately knew exactly who was behind this. At some point during her interrogation, Richard actually calls her cell phone, and law enforcement, the investigators there, they tell her to answer that call. And so she does, and she tells Richard what has happened, and he pretends that he knows nothing about what she's talking about. He says, "I guess I'm gonna have to get the newspaper to see what you're talking about." After Janie had been tortured in January, law enforcement actually started doing video surveillance on an apartment that Osageda lived in. And they actually have footage. Here's a photo. Osageda and Hariki, the night before they entered Janie's home and took the lives of 3 of her family members. Investigators say that in that video that they can actually see the two sitting outside of the apartment and taking something which they suspect is bullets and scraping them on the concrete to remove the markings from those bullets. So the following day, on March the 4th, 2012, they actually rearrest Richard on those torture charges from the situation that happened in January. They gave him a $1 million bail to keep him in jail until they could officially charge him in connection with this triple homicide. At this point, they still had not arrested the two who actually carried out this crime. On March the 18th, Janie and her sister, her future brother-in-law, and her nephew, they are all put into a witness protection, and they have been being housed in hotel rooms, and they are having to change to a different location every 2 or 3 nights just to protect their location. And on March the 18th, they're actually staying in a hotel where Janie says they just had a very uneasy feeling about it, and they decide to leave that location. That same night, at that same hotel, there is a party where Armando Osageda ends up being arrested. Now, initially, he was not charged with this specific crime. He was actually charged with having or using a counterfeit $100 bill, but in the torture charge from the situation in January was added. But it is not until December the 3rd of 2012, almost a full year after this triple homicide, when Joseph Luis Hariki is arrested for this crime. Janie says that when the entire plan was uncovered, that she learned that Richard had given instructions to Armando and Joseph to annihilate the entire family, including the animals, but only sparing the 8-year-old nephew. It is her belief that there are 1 of 2 reasons as to why she survived this triple homicide. She says that the bed that she was sleeping in was kind of messy. She said there were a lot of pillows on the bed, there were video games on the bed, and she said it's possible that the individual who came into her bedroom that night just didn't see her in there, or it's possible that that individual thought that she was the 8-year-old nephew. Why did this case take almost 13 years to go to trial? Well, when Richard was arrested and charged with this triple homicide, he actually ended up putting a hit out on one of his cellmates. Now, that hit was not carried through because law enforcement uncovered that and they were able to put a stop to that before that happened. And Richard actually has already gone to trial for that case. He was given life plus 3 years in that trial. In addition to that, Janie says that the suspects continued to fire and hire new defense attorneys, and throughout the years, the judge who was actually initially assigned to this case also passed away from cancer. And the trial took 8 long months because there were over 50 witnesses in this case. Now, initially, these 3 men, Richard Garcia, Armando Osegueda, and Joseph Henrique, they were supposed to be tried together. However, in February of 2023, Henrique ends up pleading guilty. And Osegueda was actually granted a separate trial, and he has not yet gone to trial. His trial will not be until 2026. But as I said earlier, Richard's trial just ended this last week, lasted 8 long months. And of course, the Stanislaus County jury found him guilty, and they did recommend the death penalty for Richard Garcia. This is the first time that a death penalty has been recommended in a case in Stanislaus County in nearly 2 decades. Now, the last person to be sentenced to death in that county, that was another triple homicide that happened in December of 2001, and that individual was sentenced to death in 2006. The second most recent death penalty sentence was actually Scott Peterson. Now, Scott and Lacey, they lived in Stanislaus County. It was not a Stanislaus County jury that recommended the death penalty because Scott's trial was moved to San Mateo County. The death penalty does still exist in California, but since 2019, it has been under a moratorium, which is basically when the governor says, hey, I don't agree with this, and we're not really going to do this while I'm here for the next few years. The prosecutor says that that still does not change the law, and if the prosecutor feels like the death penalty is warranted, they can continue to push for the death penalty. And the prosecutor in this case says that over the last decade, she has pushed for the death penalty in 7 different cases, but Richard Garcia's is the only one to make it to trial. Now, just talking with Janie, she expressed how difficult this has been on her family. It has completely torn her family apart. She does still have communication with her sister and her nephew. She says she speaks with them weekly, sometimes daily. But as you can imagine, things will never be like they were. And Janie ended up losing that pregnancy, but she is a mom. She is a mom today. She does have 2 young children. However, the trial was not only emotionally and mentally taxing, but also financially taxing because for 8 months, she has to be in the courtroom and she can't work because she has to be in the courtroom for this trial. And it has put a huge financial strain on her and on her family. So if you feel led to donate to Janie and her family, I will get a link for a GoFundMe or her Venmo or her Cash App or her PayPal, and I will include those in the comments of this video.